Hey there. So my next guest runs one of the most successful companies in the esports gaming landscape, and he gives so much advice on the landscape, like where people are falling down, where businesses are lacking, and how they can improve. He talks about his experience in the history of the esports landscape, something that a lot of people don't understand. This was a really fascinating and interesting conversation. I know you're all going to love it. Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Gamerpreneur podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Carlton. Today, I have a very special guest with us. I have Aaron Fletcher. Hey there, Aaron. How's it going?
Hey, how's it going?
That's a beautiful sunny day in Las Vegas. How about yourself?
Yeah, no, it's great here in San Francisco.
I love it. All right. So, Aaron, I like getting the show, no fluff, just right into it. So, why don't you begin by just telling us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, so I've been in esports now since 2003. So I started out doing a ton of different events with ESL, ESWC, WCG, pretty much every acronym in the industry. So this is when they were called video game tournaments, and my parents hated that I did them. But so definitely been in the industry now for a very long time. Used to host a lot of these events, so they had 50,000 plus people live, and then have basically millions of spectators online. But had a ton of different events, and then also played professionally. So for about 10 years there, I played professionally. I was top 5 in the world in multiple different titles, everything from Counter-Strike, Call of Duty to MMOs. I played World of Warcraft, Terra, Guild Wars 2 at the top 3, top 1 level, so we made it to the top for that. And then the last games that I played at the competitive level was Trackmania and F1. So I made it top 3 in the world for those as well. So I played a plethora of titles, did a lot of stuff with that, and then kind of retired in 2014. And kind of just been trying to figure out in terms of what are the problems with the industry that I had. And I think one of the biggest ones, especially with hosting events, is being able to see ROI for brands. So brands do all these amazing things, but they're on a billboard or they're on a thing in a stadium or they're in the background, but there's no metrics to track. There's no way to see how they get ROI. There's nothing like that. So what we did is we built out Repeat to kind of facilitate that market.
Very cool. All right. That is a ton to talk about. Before we get too much into it, I start every interview with a single question. So I'm going to ask you, just like I ask everybody else, so please don't feel too special. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high, how weird are you, Aaron?
Really depends on what a definition of weird is.
I'm asking for your definition.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I would say I'm definitely a little bit more obtuse, or I'd say somewhere around about the seven or eight.
All right, I'll live with that. That's a good answer. All right, it is the Gamerpreneur podcast, and you kind of gave me a ton of background on your gaming. But when did you first start playing?
I think I was like 3 or 4, I believe. I think we got a PC in the house. I think I played a whole pile of different games like Pong and stuff on Atari or one of the consoles when I was like, I think I was like really young, like 2 or 3, because I definitely remember there was a tank on the screen for one of them, and then it was only black and white, and that's all you could see. And then the other one was the 2 Pongs. I actually can't remember what game it is right now. And then there was also got into, I think the very first game that I really remember was, I think it was Flight Simulator. It was like 1989, I think, or 1990, when we got a computer and kind of dove into that. And then everything from Wolfenstein, I think I got when I was like 6 or 7. And then the first network game that I played was Doom 2 in like 1996. And I remember I was on dial-up. Me and my friend were hanging up the phone, ringing each other because we're like 10 or something, trying to figure out what an IP address was. So it was a very interesting time.
Okay, and what got you into esports or competitive gaming?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So I actually had scholarships for basketball. So I had a scholarship for Michigan State and one for Australia for the Air Force and stuff like that. And I was going to do aeronautical engineering, and I ended up basically breaking my knee, or like doing my knee in and my arm, and had a big fall there when I went up. And so I ended up basically losing the scholarships, or kind of delaying the scholarships for a year, because a lot of it was for basketball. So I ended up basically putting that drive into playing games competitively, to be honest. So I used to work at one of the local net cafes and managed a computer store. So I kind of really dove into that kind of head first anyway.
Okay, wonderful. Now you run a very successful business. Do you even have time to play video games right now?
I do, but it's generally on the clock. So if we do, we'll play Rocket League as a team, and we'll do team building stuff. I think the last the one we did a few weeks ago was everybody's golf. I think like that. We were all playing as a team, and so we do a whole pile of different things like that. We'll split off into groups and we'll play different games or do things like that, just as part of like it's team building more likely than more than anything else, just because it gives us an environment where developers can talk to marketing, where the support can talk to these guys in an environment that's not work, and it allows them to basically have a little bit of fun, and it brings down those barriers, which is great.
I love it. Okay, now one last like gaming related question, then we'll talk about business and
Yeah.
entrepreneurship and everything what you're doing. Um, you've had the full gamut of pretty much everything available since everything came out. But if you had to choose one game as your all-time favorite, which one would it be?
Oh god. I would probably say, honestly, I think Final Fantasy VII was the game that I had the most awe in. And it is probably the most fondest memory, just because when the cutscene at the start, and I remember there was Ariel, I think, and all this light around her, and it was just, I was like, holy crap, graphics can't look this good. Like, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And after that, it was kind of like I fell in love with RPGs and all those sort of things as well. And it kind of, I think that's where it kind of opened me up into kind of everything, and seeing that, oh, okay, so there's more than just shooting stuff on a screen half the time or a platformer. I was like, oh, stories can actually come out of this. And I think that was kind of where that kind of developed as well.
I love it. I remember you get what 10 to 20 hours in Midgar, and then it opens up to the whole world.
Yeah,
You're like,
yeah,
what?
yeah, I know, and especially because like you're not on the internet, so there wasn't a ton of spoilers. So it happens, and you're like, I have a world map. Oh my God, that's a thing. Oh, this is so cool. And it was
Yeah.
just, it was like I played definitely a lot of games before then, like, so it was good though. It was definitely very interesting, and I think that's probably the most succinct memory that I remember.
Okay, beautiful. Now let's get over to the preneur part because that is what we're really here for today. Um, tell us about Repeat, please.
Yeah, so Repeat's one of the largest tournament platforms where users can compete for cash and prizes in games like Fortnite, Call of Duty, League of Legends, and more. So we're definitely pushing on more titles there at the moment. We're the only company that can create these global large-scale tournaments with thousands of people in a single event. So we do events with 10,000, 20,000, up to hundreds of thousands of people in one single tournament. So far, we've hosted over 75,000 tournaments with more than 80 million games played in those tournaments.
So cool. What made you decide to start it?
It's actually interesting. So I think the biggest thing that kind of annoyed me is when I was playing kind of professionally and going to a lot of these other websites, the original kind of reason for starting it was wanting to make sure people got paid. So there was another company that I kind of founded before I was doing this, and I think it was one of my friends is like, hey, there's nothing out there for consoles. And I'm like, he's like, there's nowhere to play tournaments for consoles. And I'm like, all right, let's build something. So we end up building something out for that and then started doing events, but kind of really getting into it was me. I have probably $250,000 worth of unpaid prize pools. And it's because most of the websites that are still out there now require like manual verification of results. So when you play online against someone for cash or in a tournament, let's say the two of us play, we go play and you win 12-3. We have to come back to the website and you enter you won 12-3 manually. And then I'm like, I come back and I have to, as the loser, say, yeah, he beat me 12-3, take my money. And you can imagine where there's a bit of friction there. So there's been some inventive ways that companies have kind of got around this. I think MLG did an interesting one where they tested a peer review system so that if it ended in dispute, people could then put up that thing for review with basically evidence. And it was hilarious to see because it turned into a popularity contest in the end, where it was people that were definitely not the winner were winning, and they were doing it to troll people. So basically, that was my biggest problem that I had. So the core thing that I wanted to build before I went to my CTO, and I'm like, knowing him now for a long time, and I'm like, the only way we are building any of this is if it's automated. And he's like, I would not be doing anything unless it isn't. So everything we build is automated, scalable, and that's our focus.
Okay, fantastic. Now, Aaron, before we went live for the recording, you and I had a nice little chat, and we were discussing just the issues that we see in the business of esports, competitive gaming, gaming generally. How is your business differently? How are you avoiding the pitfalls? How are you profitable at all?
Yeah, so I think the biggest focus we have is we kind of have two real big revenue streams that we kind of push on. Our main one right now is brands. So we work with brands to create these large scale tournaments. So these are brands like Totino's, US Army, General Mills, Papa John's, basically a ton of different brands there that we work with or have worked with, that we do these large scale tournaments with. And they pay us a fee there to manage everything from start to finish. So we do everything from managing the tournament, player prize pool payouts. We do all the KYC, AML, everything built into it. We do all the promotions. So if they want to do a 10,000 person tournament, we find all the users for them to enter that tournament. We'll go work with the influencers. So we have a network of about 23,000 influencers that we work with that have about 500 million plus following. So that's where we kind of get our forte, is creating this full service esports events and tournaments for brands.
Okay, and you specifically, what is your role? What is it you do day to day? Because I'm assuming you're not like number crunching and adding stuff to the database.
Yeah. Basically, my role is generally right now putting out fires. So I think it's reading emails, putting out fires. I'm doing a lot of our investment stuff is where my focus is right now because we're raising our next round. So everything from investor emails, all that sort of fun stuff. My main job on the day to day is definitely putting out fires. So because I have a plethora of being able to do a bit of everything. I've done computer science. I've done design, I've done business. So I've done all these kind of things at university. And so it allows me to kind of touch on a bit of everything. Like we had one of our designers end up getting COVID. Actually, both our designers end up getting COVID. They're good now, they're fine. So I had to take over design for the week and was doing all our marketing materials and stuff like that. So really kind of where I need to put our fires. I write all the algorithms and the maths and everything we have behind all our systems. So all our scoring, and I do all that because I do a lot of data analytics and stuff around that because I've been doing that now within video games for about 15 years, writing software for video games. I worked at Riot. I did work with Squaresoft writing cheater algorithms and patterns around anti-cheat. I've worked with Steam on the similar things. I've worked with server infrastructure with Riot. I've done a ton of stuff on that side of things as well. So not just so it's a bit of everything.
Okay, so you've seen basically every aspect of the gaming world. This is really cool.
Pretty much. The only one is not being a streamer, just because it drives me bonkers. I just can't do that.
All right. With that in mind, what what are the challenges you see in this industry? Where are people falling down? Because I really want the show to be about advice for the audience.
Yep.
Like I bring people on not just to tell me how amazing they are, but to
Yeah.
give something back.
Yeah, the biggest thing I think I see is there's probably two big problems. One is you see from a brand's perspective, they all want to come in and be the culture. So they want to create their culture. The problem is gaming, they have their own culture and then it's really segmented. So you have to adapt, you need to evolve. And the same thing happens with companies. So there's a lot of companies out there, they're like building their company, they're doing this. And most of them, first of all, they build a product they think they want to see because they're like, I'm a gamer. And they use the slogan built by gamers for gamers. And I'm like, that's bullshit. That is not how that works. It is the worst slogan you could possibly have. It's you need to build for that market, not build for, that perspective kind of personality they think is themselves. And I think that's where a lot of companies go wrong. And I think brands go wrong from the culture kind of perspective.
So it's just customer profile then, because I mean, I've interviewed enough people on the show, over 200. I don't think there is such thing as a typical gamer. Like we're so different. It's just a hobby. How do you build that customer profile then? Is it based on the game? Is it based on geographic location? What do you think?
It's based on a few different things. So it's definitely geographic location that changes the game title you should focus on. So in the Asian market, if you're targeting that, is definitely more mobile centric as well as League of Legends and titles like that. If you're targeting India, that's just mobile centric. That's it. PUBG is probably your main title you should ever target there at all. And then you've got other like the US. You look at Call of Duty as an example. And if you want to target a lot of the Asian market, they're different games, and most people don't actually realize that. Call of Duty is not the same game you play here in the US as what you play in a lot of the Asian countries. It's Call of Duty Online, I think, which is actually free to play. It's not Call of Duty that you get now. And it's so that it's understanding that kind of landscape. And I think, sorry, one more thing that actually I think is probably a big pitfall with most companies, just to touch on that I think is probably actually the biggest one out of all of them, people building companies, is they don't understand the history. So most of these people are like, oh, I'm an esports consultant. I've been in the industry for 2 years, and they think it's new. And I think that's the problem of this misconception where everyone's like, the industry is brand new. And I'm like, no, it's not. It has been around for like, 20 years. You have a look at one of the biggest ones, the failures was tournament.com. So they raised $100 million, were out of business within a year. And they raised that first round was $100 million. And no one knows who the hell they are. You have a look at the history of Playverse as an example, who raised $100 million now. Do you know what they were before they were Playverse and what they're doing the high school stuff now? That's the thing. No one knows, but I do. And I'm like, you have a look at their history. They did for 3 years or 4 years. They were building a betting platform for head-to-head matches. They were funded by Deep Space Ventures and a few other companies like that. And they built out this head-to-head kind of platform that kind of couldn't get critical mass, which is just, that's the problem with head-to-head platforms anyway in competitive gaming. So they ran into the same problem as everyone else. So what they did is he wiped the internet of everything that was that, and then went and raised based on the high school stuff, which is fine. But it was just interesting to see that this history of seeing these failures, no one knows a lot of them exist. You take CGL as another example of a league that raised $100 million, and they were ran by people that probably shouldn't have been running it, because they spent $5 million of that to do a draft at the Playboy Mansion. And I'm like, and then they ended up buying the rights to Complexity, I think, for like $10 million, and then sold it back to them. Then Complexity bought it back for like $500,000. Like it was just a mess. So it's just all this history that's happened that everyone doesn't really know about. I think, and then the other one is the very first. You take Candy Crush, another one with history. Candy Crush owned and ran the highest and the biggest skill gaming platform for years. So they ran that as before they actually were doing Candy Crush, and they tested Candy Crush on that platform, and that's how Candy Crush exists today, because they did all the tests and everything on there to find out what worked. And they were doing skilled gaming, running I think several $1 million basically a month through that platform in skilled gaming.
So then what's the fix? Is it bringing in people who have more business acumen? Is it just learning more? Like how does all of this get better?
Find people like myself, or like my CMO, or like Chris Smith is another one who's a great one to talk to on LinkedIn. These guys are willing to chat. We're willing to have a talk to you and spend 30 minutes telling you what the problems are. And I'm like, it's not hard to tell someone and say, hey, you can reach out and do that. These guys, there's plenty of them that are out there that have been around for 10, 15 years, and people just don't go look for them. They may not be in flashy jobs. They may not be this, but they understand the history. And they may not be, most of the guys that have been in the industry 15 years don't push themselves as esports consultants. That's the new thing. But just try to find these people that have been out there doing this.
Okay. Now you specifically, Aaron, my show is, I try to talk about the gamer, not necessarily the business of gaming. So I want to pull back for a second. What makes you different from everybody else, right? Like what are your skills, your unique talents, or what makes you that special sauce?
I'm a generalist. Like that is probably it. So I think the reason I'm able to do a lot of the stuff I'm able to do is because what I used to do from basically the age of like 12 or 13, I used to every single week figure out a problem and create a project for myself. And that was it. Some of those projects lasted 6 months, so they didn't last a week, but I was basically trying to find something that I could do, that I could fix or build or do. Like I created, one of the problems I had was definitely due around about the Napster era and everything like that, with downloading TV shows and all those sort of things, when it was kind of like the big thing to do. And being able to do that because I could use the internet very well, and having everyone from like parents or sister, and they're like, hey, can you get this for me? Can you download this? So I built out an automated system to just do all that. I built out my own Netflix service to be able to stream that software anywhere else in the world. I built out basically a browser and a website for that, and built basically what you've got there now as a problem I had. And I think that would led to me to kind of learning these different things. I'll set up servers, or I'll go play games, or I'll do design, or I'll get into these things. And I'm like, oh, this week I'm going to work on this. And I don't do it now because I don't have time, but that's allowed me to do a lot of things, because at the end of the day, if you're trying to run a company, your job is to solve problems and figure out puzzles. The biggest asset you can have is to figure out how all the pieces work together and solve that problem. You should be surrounding yourself by the smartest people you can find, and they should all be smarter than you. If you're the smartest person in the room, you've already failed. Simple as that.
Love it. Okay, Aaron, I'd like you to go back in time with me for a second. Back to, I think you said 1996 when you were playing Doom 2, first time really getting on the internet, first time like getting to see that whole thing. If you could go back in a time machine with me, you get to go up to little Aaron back then. You could tell him all the ups and downs, all the good, the bad, all the accomplishments and failures you've had over the years. Give him all the knowledge you have so that he could have an entirely different life than you, that bigger, better, faster, more profitable. But there was one thing he absolutely had to know. What would you tell him?
I honestly don't think there would be anything that I would change, because I've kind of looked at it there, and and the reason I say that is because the reason I got into gaming is because I had scholarships for that, and I broke my knee, and I'm like, if I go back and tell myself not to do that, I probably wouldn't have the drive to be in gaming. And then if I have a look at I've been working since I was 10, so I ended up basically working, taking over my family's business, was CTO of a company when I was 15, sold that when I was 20, and I look back on that when I was doing that, I absolutely hated it. I was waking up at 4 a.m. I was doing all this crap. I hated it, and trying to go to school and everything at the same time. It was terrible. And I would not wish it on anyone else, but I'm glad I did it, because it gave me the ability to not be afraid of basically anything, because I know that the carrying anything on my back, I'm not worried about. And I can't think of one thing that I would ever tell me, oh, invest in Apple. There you go. Probably that. It'll make life easier. Instead of raising money, could just have it there. So it'd be okay.
Okay. Related question. So I believe that we learn the most in our life from our failures, not necessarily our successes. Yep. It's when you fall down flat on your face that you have to learn something from it to be able to pick yourself up and move forward. Whereas when you succeed, you may not know what happened. It just, I did it right.
It just happens. It's luck meets opportunity.
Right. So I'd like to ask you, what do you consider your biggest failure in life, and what did you learn from it?
I think it is probably the founding of one of my other companies there that I had. And I think the biggest thing that I learned is, so most companies die from basically one thing. The biggest killer of companies is foundership issues. The second biggest thing is not hitting market fit. Everyone's so worried about their competitors, and they're but less than 2% of companies die from competitors. And generally it's getting bought out by Amazon or something like that. Because if you're in a market where your competitor can kill you, the market's not big enough to start with. You shouldn't be there. So I think the biggest failure I had was that. And what I learned was, you need to definitely find the right people to found the company with. They need to be, you need to have people there, like the people that I have around me now that I founded the current company with. We don't fight about anything. I don't think I've ever had an argument with any of them, but we will always disagree on everything. And I think it is one of the most vital things, is understanding that resistance is the best thing you can possibly have. Because if you have to prove yourself and answer a question for an idea or a vision or the way you want to push the company, and you can't answer that, don't do it. So if they're pushing you and they're like, no, it's a terrible idea, and you have to explain it to them and sell them on it, and I'm like, and then it makes sense, or they help you evolve it, or they help you do this, it turns into a completely different thing. Whereas a lot of people aren't open for that. So I think that was probably my biggest failure, was doing that company. And it was more the way, it was the people that I found it with, the 20 different directions we went in, because most of the time you need to focus. You take 2 or 3 things at max to focus on, because if you're focusing on 20 things and you're going 100 miles, but you're going in 20 different directions, you've gone nowhere. You've gone absolutely nowhere. Whereas if you're focusing on one thing and you've gone even a mile, you've gone further. That's all it is.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing. On the flip side of that question, what is something that you are working to improve on yourself today?
I think it would be managing my time. So I think one of the biggest things is keeping meetings short. So managing my time around that. I think meetings are definitely the bane of my existence, but they need to be there. So having meetings, managing people, and everyone's like, you need to cut all the meetings. And I'm like, no, that's terrible. That's just not going to work, because your staff won't like you, because you're like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to talk to you again. I'm not doing this. Just do your work. And it doesn't lead to it's keeping them short, keeping conversations brief wherever you can. And I think the time management is definitely the biggest thing I'm trying to do, and then the other thing is allowing myself to let go. So what that means is, as you scale a company, yes, you can probably do that job perfect because you understand exactly what you want for that job. But at the end of the day, you're hiring people to do that job for you. And if you can't pull away and just let them do it, it leads to you trying to micromanage all these situations. So making sure that I let go of these tasks, because at the end of the day, done is better than perfect. Simple as that.
Done, not pretty. I love it.
Yeah.
All right. One last fun question before we bring this in for a landing, Aaron. What do you think is something that people misunderstand about you the first time they meet you?
I don't know. I think the biggest thing is because I'm 6 foot, like 6'2", 6'3". I have broad shoulders, everything like that, and everyone's kind of like, "Oh, he looks scary." And I think that's probably the biggest thing. I think then I open my mouth and like, "Oh, okay, he's Australian. That's cool. That's cool. It's okay."
It's the accent.
So I think that definitely helps, but I think that's probably the biggest misrepresentation. And then everyone's like, the other one is you can't be a gamer, because they see me as, oh, you don't look like the stereotype of needs to be this. And I'm like, I've always defended that. And I'm like, it doesn't look like that. Like, there is no look. There is no way. Just because TV represented that back in, the early 2000s for a marketing smear campaign, why are you still thinking that's how it is? Like, gamers these days, they use all the necessities like everyone else. They need insurance. They need all these things. They're normal people.
I love it. Thank you so much for saying that. The stated mission of this show is to dispel that myth. So I appreciate it. All right, Aaron, this has been a blast. How do people find you? Where are you at on social media? Contact information, all that, please.
Yeah, I think the best way to reach out to me is just by email. So aaron@repeat.gg. So we have repeatgg socials, so feel free to ping me on any of those as well. But I think the email is definitely the easiest way, because I try to avoid social as much as I can. It's a bit too much of a distraction.
I agree. Fantastic. All right. As we wrap this up, do you have any final thoughts you want to share, or anything I didn't ask you think we still need to cover?
No, everything's good. I think this is awesome. Thanks so much.
Beautiful. In that case, thank you so much, Aaron, for coming on. I genuinely do appreciate this.
No, that's great. Thank you.
All right. And for everybody else, I'm going to remind you all, don't be just a gamer, be a gamerpreneur.